Cleo winced slightly as the harness bit into her shoulders. Coming out of FTL was always the worst part, even with the inertial dampening systems. There was no way to fully insulate the ship from the sudden deceleration. Everything had to be strapped in, or it would likely go flying, and that included people. Unlike crates and cargo boxes, though, her skin screamed in pain every time she jerked against the thick nylon straps. The whirring sound of the engine spinning down filled the ship. She reached down, snapping the harness open, and slipped the slings off to the side. Then she leaned forward in her chair and began to punch the buttons on her visual display. Her fingers drummed over the screen with practiced, easy speed, and the holographic displays of the in-system objects began to pop out of the console. The darkness of the cockpit was quickly replaced by the green glow of the holograms, rotating slowly in front of her.
Useless, asteroid, useless,
she said, flicking the holograms aside one by one. Most of it was crap, small asteroids and comets, jetsam abandoned in the face of pirates or police, and chunks of burnt-out flotsam so degraded that it wasn't worth the fuel cost of hauling it.
Jesus Christ, why did you even bring me here?
The computer buzzed and the hologram of the ship's AI popped out of the dashboard.
The sensors detected valuable metals and high-grade, processed electronics. The probability of there being valuable salvage, like from a ship, is 88%.
Yeah, whatever. 88% my ass.
Cleo stopped.
Hello.
Her finger paused halfway through the action of swiping away another image. She spun her hand over in the air and gently swiped it back, keeping the image in front of her.
What's that?
Scanning.
The ship beeped again, trying to track it. Cleo ignored her. She touched her hands together and then spread them out diagonally until her fingernails were touching the cool aileron of the viewport and the colder metal of the bulkhead.
That's an optical computing core,
she said to herself as the image swelled in front of her.
Charred casing, but the interior should be fine. Well, good enough for junk traders. And there's still a comm relay attached.
Confirmed. This is a Mark 7 photo-core pulse drive, produced by Innervate Tech in 2155.
I don't care when it was made, tell me where it is.
12,000 meters, Vector 57, Mark 27.
The AI read out. Cleo punched the engine button, then clenched her fists and began to guide the ship towards the wreckage. The vectoring thrusters embedded around the hull fired, snapping the limber junk craft to her every whim.
Is there any more salvage nearby?
She said as they began to bear down on the core. The computer hummed, a gentle whine that somehow complemented the melody made from the scorching bass of the engines and the staccato treble bursts of the thrusters.
Affirmative,
the AI said. More holograms began to flash up, and Cleo swore under her breath.
This is a gold mine.
Dozens of parts, ranging from small to large, were floating around in space. There were chunks of a blown computer, engine parts, relays, and internal circuitry, and even what looked to be an intact replicating printer unit.
The locations and trajectories of the debris would suggest an explosive decompression of a ship, possibly due to internal detonation,
the AI told her. Then there was another moment of humming, and the soft voice continued.
There is insufficient debris for an entire ship. It is possible that the vessel is still semi-intact nearby.
Scan for it. Find it,
Cleo said. She wasn't sure that it would pay off. After all, if there was an entire ship out there, then why hadn't the scanners detected it already? Even so, it was worth a try. Maybe, hopefully, she'd get lucky.
I'll pick up the rest of it. Plot a course?
This course will allow all debris to be salvaged for minimum fuel burn, whilst guiding you towards the probable location of the wreck.
Thanks.
Cleo focused on the course laid out for her, using the momentum of the ship to drift to each piece of salvage in turn. She heard each piece crackle as it floated through the force field, then fall down to the cargo bay floor with a clang. Each one made her smile, like a satisfied child dropping coins into a piggy bank. But she began to notice the corpses. Space was vast and full of bodies, and yet somehow she seemed to run into most of them. It was an inevitable part of her work, she supposed, picking through the hulls of ships like a vulture. That was where the bodies were, and it was just a grim part of her job. Even so, she tried to avoid the bodies whenever she could. Floating in space wasn't exactly a dignified burial, but it was better than what she could give them. A downed shot of Jenna Brand fire whiskey, and 5 minutes in the ship's incinerator. Besides, she didn't like having to scrape the guts off the cargo bay floor. As she drew closer and closer to the likely site of the ship, though it was hard to avoid the bodies, they began to loom larger in her VR goggles. The ship, whatever it was, must have been absolutely enormous, at least if the size of the crew was anything to go by. The bodies began to multiply, groups of them drifting between the increasingly charred chunks of metal. Some were too close to the salvage to be avoided, and some were literally fused to the metal, skin burnt against steel until they melted together into a single mass of twisted, barbecue-stinking grotesquerie.
Lisa,
Cleo finally said, breaking her long, pleasant silence.
what's that?
Query nonspecific. What is what?
The bodies. Some of them have something, I don't know, it looks like rock.
Scanning.
The AI said. Another chunk of metal clanged into the cargo bay, along with a mass of body parts that would make several incomplete bodies. They slapped against the deck with a sickening thud that Cleo heard even in the cockpit. She winced, but kept going to the next point.
It is an organic crystalline material of unknown origin.
The AI finally told her.
This substance is not on record.
Is it dangerous?
Probability of toxicity to human life, 7%.
That's good, I suppose.
Said Cleo. Then another thought struck her.
Why is it glowing?
Unknown. This substance is not mentioned in the records of any ship in the theocratic realm.
How did it get here?
Unknown. The substance
Is unknown in all records? I know. Guess?
The substance may have impacted the bodies during the explosion.
Alright, that's good enough for me. Keep scanning though, in case.
Cleo said. Something was nagging at her, but she didn't say it. Besides, just then, something loomed in front of her. The ship was even larger than she had imagined. It was clearly one of the monastery ships, probably a science vessel with the secret order, if she had to guess. The military ships were always painted brighter, with chapter colors and insignias on the side. Only the secret order painted their ships jet black to hide them in the vast blackness of space.
Where did that come from?
She demanded, swearing slightly and pulling her hands back. The ship jerked a little as the braking force cut in. She almost tumbled over the dashboard, and despite the painful welts in her shoulders, she suddenly wished she had her harness strapped in.
Unknown. The ship has anti-scan technology that hides it from my sensors.
Even with the giant fucking hole in the side of it?
Cleo asked. The ship beeped.
Yes. Even with a giant expletive hole in the side of the hull.
It said. The hole was massive. It ran like a jagged scar down the side of the hull, running at least 1,000 feet long, 1/3 of the length of the ship. The worst damage was in the middle, with huge rips and tears dragging towards the stern. Cleo counted 17 decks fully vacuum exposed, and another 3 with partial punctures through the side.
Jesus Christ, what could have done this?
She said. Even as they watched, the ship tilted over, and another small cloud of bodies drifted out.
Scans are limited due to the cloaking effect of the ship.
The robotic voice paused and then continued.
Visual indications are of an internal explosion, detonating several of the internal fuel tanks. Scans of the wreckage also indicate unknown chemical accelerants fed the explosion.
Life signs?
None.
In the whole ship? Are you sure?
Cleo asked. The computer scanned again and then beeped.
Affirmative. At least 70% of the ship has decompressed. In addition, secondary explosions appear to have ruptured the ERB drive, and the entire wreck has been flooded with gamma burst radiation well beyond human tolerance.
Is the wreck still dangerous?
No. The radiation levels are low enough that your EV suit will keep you safe,
the AI said. If Cleo didn't know better, she would have thought there was concern in the robotic voice. Wishful thinking, probably.
And the wreckage?
Any salvage from the ship will need to be decontaminated. The wreckage collected so far was ejected before the ERB drive was damaged, and is safe.
Good, I'm glad.
Cleo said.
Last thing I need is a dose of radiation poisoning.
The little junk trader had almost ground to a halt. They drifted almost imperceptibly towards the vast shell in front of them. Cleo's mind was already racing, trying to work out how to profit. If the military knew that the ship was ruined, they'd be coming.
Is there a transponder?
She asked.
No.
Interesting.
That raised another possibility. If there was no transponder, there might be time for a couple more junk runs. Cleo stopped mid-thought. Something thudded against the hull.
What the fuck was that?
Cleo said, snapping to attention.
Debris impacting the hull. Several corpses.
Close the cargo doors now.
The door hissed and then slammed shut, and Cleo watched in horror as shards of metal and bloody body parts floated in front of her, thudding and clunking against the cockpit. She cut the engines entirely, groaning and waiting. Smears of blood started to cover the viewport, giving an ominous crimson sheen to the whole scene. Little by little, the cloud of severed limbs and torsos began to pass. Each chunk trailed something, floating clouds of blood droplets or semi-liquidized organs, or jagged strips of flesh. It was horrifying, but Cleo was just starting to relax again, sure the worst was over, when the body slammed into the clear Elan screen. She screamed, jerking back into the chair and tensing up. That body was completely intact, and there were far more chunks of rock embedded into it than any of the others. As the body had hit the cockpit, it had wiped away some of the blood. She could see more clearly, enough to make out the large, glowing crystal in its chest, and the dozens of tiny, diamond-like shards that covered the poor bastard's face and hands. She relaxed again. The Elan was strong enough to absorb micrometeor impacts without cracking. The body had just shocked her, nothing more. She was safe and feeling quite smug about her decision to close the cockpit.
Is that it?
She asked the AI.
Is the debris cloud gone now?
Affirmative.
Cleo stared at the body in front of her, floating a few inches away. Most bodies didn't look that good after a period of being exposed to the void. There was something almost alive about it. If it hadn't been on the other side of the viewport, she would have thought he was alive. And then, it opened its eyes. She screamed and threw herself back into the seat.
No, that's impossible.
She choked out. The body ignored her, ignored physics and biology, and all known science, all manners and good taste. The face twisted into an unholy smile. The glowing crystals were even embedded into its teeth. And as the lips stretched thinner, the glow started to leak out. It looked like a jack-o'-lantern, ghoulish and unpleasant in the viewport. A hand shot out and grabbed onto one of the maintenance rails that circled the viewport. The other hand drew back and swung towards the Elan glass. The fist slammed into the screen, leaving another, clearer smear of blood there. Cleo screamed again, and the body seemed to laugh. The fist drew back and swung again, and again and again. Cleo's scream went on until she had no air left. Then her eyes widened, and in the silence, she could hear the hiss. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. But there, in front of her, she could see it. Small cracks in the Elan viewport.
No,
she said. Her voice a haunted whisper.
That's impossible.
The body smiled wider, and the fist swung once more. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Send your true story or creepypasta to the email in the description. My shirts, my Patreon, my Instagram, my Twitter are down there too. Be good to animals, even people. So.
Ja, snämar, Bergsbus, Rish.
Can anybody tell me what this song is? If you can, and you're right, you're awesome. I just needed something for the end screen. So maybe I'll do shit like that from now on.